Any of you familiar with what a monkey trap is? It's a very simple thing. You get a jar with a small opening and chain it to something so it can't be taken away, and you drop a banana inside it. So that when the monkey comes along, he sees the banana, he reaches in and grabs the banana. But now that you've got a fist instead of a hand, it won't come back out. It's stuck inside the jar. And the monkey will not get away because he will not let go of his banana. And he stays there until you come and grab him, bop him on the head, and do whatever they do with monkeys. I don't know. I've never eaten monkey. I know in Indiana Jones and what was it, the Temple of Doom, they ate him. But it seems like a really stupid way to die, right? Just let go of the banana already, right? Just let it be. Get out of there. That's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. The author of Hebrews, and I don't mean by this to tell you don't need to come to listen to these sermons, but really the whole point of the book of Hebrews is that Jesus is better. Jesus is better, and that's kind of what I've titled the whole series. He's better than anything else. He's better than everything you could put up against him. He is the true object of our existence, the only appropriate object of our devotion and love and hope and trust are in its ultimate expression. That's the theme that runs through all of Hebrews, and the author of Hebrews is trying to bring his readers along with him to really come to the realization that Jesus is more important than anything. And we've been kind of working our way along in his argumentation and his presentation of information. And we kind of hit a break in chapter 5. We reach verse 11 where the author of Hebrews is comparing Jesus to other priests. And he says, Jesus has been made priest in the manner of Melchizedek. And then he stops and says, but you know, there are many really deep things I want to say to you about this, but I'm concerned you guys might not be ready to hear all of this. And we have this kind of extended pause where he warns them that if you turn down Jesus, there's nothing left. Even if you are turning down Jesus to hang on to the law of Moses, the Old Testament, the very 10 Commandments and all of that, even if you reject Jesus and say, I'm going to hang on to the 10 Commandments, even so, that's not going to do it for you. He talks about all that, and then he returns to talk about Jesus as this incredible high priest. So let me recap just very quickly. Last week we were looking at him saying to his readers that we have an absolutely certain hope in Jesus. I titled the message last week, Why Hope? And the answer to that question, according to the author of Hebrews, is we can hope in Jesus because what God has laid forth in Jesus is the most sure thing in existence. It's more sure than that the earth will continue to rotate on its axis. It's more sure than that the sun will rise tomorrow. Because God has guaranteed this. This is actually the fulfillment of a promise God made to Abraham. And he said, in your descendant, I will bless all the families of the earth. And Jesus is the fulfillment of that promise. And the author of Hebrews reminds his readers, God didn't just say, I'm thinking about doing this. He said, I promise to do this. And let me give you a second indication of just how serious I am about this. I swear by myself, I'm going to do this. God appealed to the highest thing he could appeal to guarantee that his promise would be kept. He appealed to himself. And the author of Hebrews says, when we are hoping in Jesus, we're not hoping in some unsure thing. It's not wishful thinking. We are hoping in the most secure thing out there. And he concludes what we looked at last week with these words. about this hope that God has set before us in Jesus, which we have as an anchor of the soul, both secure and abiding and penetrating inside the curtain where Jesus entered as our precursor, having become high priest in the manner of Melchizedek for eternity. And now we're going to get to this. Let's unpack what it means to say that Jesus is an eternal priest in the manner of Melchizedek. That's kind of where we pick things up today. So we're in chapter 7. I've titled today's message, A Better Hope. A Better Hope. So let's pick it up in verse 1. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, and the way I've kind of tried to lay this out, this is a very long sentence. Most translators kind of divide it up into separate sentences, but he suspends his concluding thought until the very end of this whole chain of things he has to say about Melchizedek. So I kind of kept it all together. We're going to do all the way verses 1 through 3. It's all one sentence. And we don't get to the conclusion of this sentence until the end of verse 3. But these are details that he gleans from the very little that we have about Melchizedek in the Bible. There are two passages. There's a passage in Genesis, and there's Psalm 110, verse 4, where God promises about the Messiah that he's going to become a priest forever in the manner of Melchizedek. And then, of course, the Genesis account that tells us about Abraham's encounter with Melchizedek. That's all we have to go on. So he really picks apart. Let me see, what does the scripture tell us about Melchizedek? Let's try to understand what it means when God says, I am making the Messiah a high priest forever in the manner of Melchizedek. So he says, what do we know about Melchizedek? Well, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom Abraham also separated out a tenth of everything. First, translated king of righteousness. That's referring back to his name, Melchizedek. That translates as king of righteousness. Furthermore, also king of Salem, which means king of peace. Salem means peace. And it retains that in many of the ancient languages of the area. In Arabic, we talk about salam being peace. In Hebrew, it's shalom. Salem has the meaning of peace. What else can we say about him? Well, there's without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but having been made like the Son of God. All this is stuff we know about Melchizedek. So what about Melchizedek? He remains a priest forever. That's where the sentence finishes. So let's go back and kind of look at these details. Well, just a sec. What we have in Melchizedek then is a picture of the Messiah, because God uses David centuries after Melchizedek is gone from the story of Israel to say, I'm going to raise up a king who will rule eternally, and he is also going to be a priest eternally. And the pattern after which he's going to be priest is not the pattern of Levi established by the law of Moses, but the pattern of Melchizedek, who predates the giving of the law by at least a couple of hundred years, if not significantly more than that. So we know that he was a priest of the Most High God. We know that when Abraham was returning from fighting against the kings up in the northern regions, north of the Sea of Galilee, he returned and had rescued Lot, his nephew, from these kings. As he was coming back, Abraham encounters Melchizedek, and Melchizedek blesses Abraham. Also, in that encounter, Abraham gives him a tithe, a tenth of all the spoils that he's bringing back from this war. And the author of Hebrews is really trying to dig into every little bit of meaning we can possibly find in this, because there is so little information about Melchizedek. The name does mean king of righteousness. And in antiquity, people tried to assume names that communicated who they were, which means that this guy was known as a leader who did the right thing. He was known as an upright king who the people would be happy to refer to as king of righteousness. And he happened to rule over a city that valued peace enough to make that their name. He was king of peace, the city of peace, which might tell you something about the kind of city he governed over. Now, here's the really odd thing about him, though. How many of you have read the book of Genesis? Let me see a show of hands. The whole thing, 50 chapters. How many names do we have in Genesis? More than you wanted to read, right? Genesis is full of names, and every time somebody's introduced, he's tied into the family tree of man. And Genesis tries to track for us where all the nations and tribes of the earth came from and spread out from. Genesis is very careful about all of this. And just about every character, even a minor character who is mentioned in Genesis, at least we know who his father was, so that we can ground him somehow. And yet this Melchizedek, we are not told who his father or mother was. We are not told whether he had any children. He just kind of floats there in this Genesis narrative and really stands out as somebody who is significant enough that the great patriarch Abraham, and Abraham is in Genesis where everything comes to a point, where God finally intervenes in human affairs and says, I am going to bless every family on earth, and I'm starting it with Abraham. It's when the tide of Cain and Abel and the flood and all the sin and ugliness of the world hits a turning point. And yet this Abraham is being blessed by Melchizedek. This Abraham is giving a tithe to Melchizedek. This figure is placed above Abraham. And yet we're not even told who his father is. That's really odd in the book of Genesis. Read Genesis again. You'll notice when people are introduced, we're told who their parents are, or at least the father. And oftentimes they're tracked into the whole family clan. No father, no mother, no genealogy. We don't know where he comes from. We don't know who came after him. And this is the observation the author of Hebrews makes about this. So it's like he has no beginning and no end. We're not told when he was born. We're not told when he died. He just sits there in the Genesis story as kind of a timeless figure who kind of floats above the human race and is not even tied into it. He's kind of this greater than life, greater than human figure in the Genesis narrative. In that sense, the way he is described in Genesis, he's made out to be kind of like the Son of God. He kind of sits there forever in that status as above Abraham, blessing Abraham, receiving his tithe. And we have in Melchizedek a picture of what God is bringing. It's very fitting that God says to Abraham, in your descendant, I will bless all the families of the earth. Jesus is the fulfillment of that promise that God secured with an oath in which he invoked himself as the guarantee. Now the author of Hebrews is trying to tell us this promise has been kept. Jesus is here. I did not intend for that to happen, sorry. He's here. And Melchizedek becomes kind of a foreshadowing, a picture of what to expect when God brings this Messiah. But we see how great this one was. He's talking about Melchizedek, to whom even Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth from the spoils. And indeed, those of the sons of Levi who have received the priesthood are commanded to collect a tithe from the people according to the law. That is, from their brothers, even though they also have descended from Abraham. So he's saying, okay, Abraham gave a tithe to Melchizedek. Now, we're comparing Jesus to the whole Levitical priesthood, right? Let's go back to that comparison for a moment. Now, if Abraham, who is greater than Levi, gave a tithe to Melchizedek, and the Messiah is in the manner of Melchizedek, that places the Messiah above the whole Levitical priesthood. And he's saying, now the sons of Levi are commanded in the law to collect a tithe from all their brothers, even though they have just as much a claim to have descended from Abraham as they did. But because they've been set apart to the priesthood, they are authorized in the law to collect the tithe from all their brothers. But the one who does not trace his descent from them, that is Melchizedek, collected a tithe from Abraham and blessed the one who had the promises. And so God gives the promises to Abraham, and yet Melchizedek is the one blessing Abraham. Wouldn't you think Abraham would be the one in the higher position, the one that God has made promises to, the one that he could bless Melchizedek? Now it is beyond all dispute that the lesser is blessed by the greater. Right? That's the story. Now, how important are blessings in the book of Genesis? Important enough that Esau vowed to kill his twin brother when he stole his blessing? Blessings are a huge deal in the book of Genesis, and it's always the greater, the patriarch, the one who God has blessed and has increased and made great, and in that position of greatness has a spiritual legacy to pass on to the son. And Isaac blesses Jacob, and Jacob blesses his 12 sons, one of them being Levi. The greater blesses the lesser, not the other way around. Jacob, when he was dying, was not asking Levi to bless him. The greater blesses the lesser. And the author of Hebrews says that's beyond all dispute. We all understand that, right? The greater blesses the lesser. On the one hand, mortal men receive tithes. He's talking again about the Levites and their priesthood. In fact, the Greek there is literally dying men. On the one hand, we have men who are collecting tithes according to the law of Moses, and these men are mortal. They die. They're all in the process of dying. Not a one of them is going to live forever. They receive tithes. On the other hand, the one of whom it is testified that he lives. When God says, I have made you a priest forever, in the manner of Melchizedek. And through Abraham, so to speak, Levi, who receives the tithes, has paid tithes, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when he met with Melchizedek. So when Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, and given that Levi is a subset of Abraham, just a piece of what came out of Abraham, he's lesser than Abraham, then by that connection, if Abraham paid the tithe, then Levi did too, because he comes from Abraham. The whole point of all of this is to make very clear that when God says of the Messiah, I'm going to make you a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, he's putting the Messiah on a higher plane than the entire Levitical priesthood. He's more important than they, even though it's just the one Messiah. He is more important than this multitude of dying men who have been offering sacrifices and gifts in accordance with the law. And this is kind of where he's going with this. Now, and people might say, okay, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe if you argue that way, we can say Melchizedek is above the Levitical priesthood, but if Melchizedek was kind of the bomb, if he was the best there was, if he was this great high priest, then why does God, after Melchizedek, establish through the law of Moses the whole Levitical priesthood? I mean, let's face it, Melchizedek was there with Abraham, but this priesthood has been serving for over 1,000 years. This thing has history, has been established for such a long time. And given that it came after Melchizedek, isn't God saying, let's make it better? Let's establish this better priesthood? So they might still not be convinced. But this is This is a very key point in understanding this. Now, if perfection were thus available through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people had received the law. In other words, Aaron and his sons were serving already when the whole covenant of the law was given. What need would there still be for another priest to arise in the manner of Melchizedek, not named after the manner of Aaron? So the question being raised here is, can the law and the priests that serve in that law, the priests that supposedly, according to the law of Moses, mediate our relationship with God, are they capable of making us perfect? That word, again, is a form of the word telos, which means end in the sense of goal. Are they capable of taking us all the way to our intended end, our intended goal? Now, the law and the priesthood of Levi might be able to make us better. It might give us some instructions to follow, and if we take it seriously, the quality of our lives might become better. We might become better than we were. But can the law take us all the way to perfection? Can the law make us perfect enough to stare God in the eye and say, I am worthy to stand before you? Can the law do that for us? No. The law is a diagnostic tool. The law lets you know this is what you should look like. But the law is powerless to make you sinless. It can't do that. You have already messed that up. You are already sinful. The law cannot undo that. The whole Levitical priesthood, the over a millennia of service in the tabernacle and temple cannot fix that. If perfection had been available through this means, why would God talk about another thing? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right? If anybody could be saved by keeping the law, then God could say, I'm done. I have given humankind everything they need to be saved. Now get over there and do it. But the law can't fix us. It can diagnose our problem for us. It can point out, you're a sinner. It can communicate to us who God is and His grace and mercy and all these things, but it doesn't have within it the mechanism for us to avail ourselves fully of the complete redemption that God intends for us. It cannot bring us to perfection. That's why, after God had given the law, He is still talking about bringing about another priest, another mediator. And He's saying about this priest, he's going to have nothing to do with the law. Let me appeal to someone that I placed in Israel's history before the law even came around. Let's connect him to Melchizedek, not Aaron. For in the changing of the priesthood, a change in the law of necessity must occur. So if you have a priesthood that is established by the parameters of the law of Moses, and you're going to change the priesthood, and isn't the priesthood the heart of any religious system? The mechanism by which men are reconciled or their communication with God is enabled? If you change that, haven't you changed the very core of any religious system? So if you change the priesthood, you've got to change the law that established the priesthood. For the one of whom these things are said belonged to another tribe, from which none ever served at the altar. For it is obvious that our Lord sprung from Judah, a tribe about which Moses said nothing regarding priests. I want you for a moment to put yourself in the position of a first century Jew. and think a bit of your history as a people. Sometime maybe 1200 BC, maybe 1400 BC, depending on when the Exodus took place, God breaks you all out of slavery in Egypt and brings you out with powerful, mighty acts and makes from a bunch of slaves a nation and enters into a covenant with you. I will be your God. You will be my people. And here is my law. Do this, and I will bless you. Don't do this, and you will die. That was the covenant of the law. It was a merit-based system. You had to be perfect already for it to describe a person who is saved, which is the problem with the law. The law could tell you weren't saved, but it couldn't save you. But this is the system they've got, and they have been working so hard at this for 1,200 years. And obviously their success has been mixed at best. There have been centuries where they've really neglected the law and have really turned away from God and have abandoned His commandments. And we go back and forth, and finally God allows the Babylonians to take them off into exile and destroy the temple. And all this happens. And in exile, the Jews get serious about it. And they say, God, let us go back, rebuild everything, and we'll do it right. We'll stop worshiping other gods. We'll get rid of idols. We'll be serious about it. We will keep the law. And they've done that. They come back and somewhere about 520 BC, they rebuild the temple and they get serious about it. And from that point forward, for over 500 years till we get to the time the book of Hebrews is written, over 500 years, that's considerably, that's like twice as long as this country has been a nation. For that long, they have been meticulously teaching everyone throughout the world. Any Jew from the cradle to the grave is taught the law of Moses, and they learn it, they memorize it, they recite it, they are told how to keep it, and they make this their way of life. To them, the law is who they are. And now the author of Hebrews tells these people, after all they've suffered to keep this law, that God is changing it. That Jesus has come, and therefore the law has to be changed. Because God has established a new priesthood, and we cannot continue as we were before. Do you understand how momentous that is? Do you understand why when he hit chapter 5, verse 11, the author of Hebrews says, I want to tell you some pretty mind-blowing things about this, but I'm not sure you're ready. Sometimes we talk about following Jesus as though it were just like deciding that your favorite flavor of Bluebell ice cream has changed. It's not vanilla anymore. It's butter pecan. You know, we talk about it sometimes like that's all that's involved. Oh, I used to go to this building. I go to this building. I used to read this book. I read this book. Some minor thing. And I don't think sometimes we fully grasp what we're talking about. If we say Jesus is the way, the only one capable of bringing us to perfection, that means that if we're going to turn to Jesus, if we're going to put our trust and hope in Him, we have to let go of whatever else we had been living on. Now, we all have to build something. We have to use something to build our lives on. We all have to cobble together some kind of system that helps us make sense of our lives. We all do that. But when you come before Jesus, you've got to scrap that. He replaces it. He's the new thing, the only thing. And even something as sacred as the very law God gave Moses has to step aside. if you're going to follow Jesus, you've got to give up your own idea of how it all works. You've got to give up on the things you have clung to as security and hope in your life. You've got to let go of the banana. Because the only way to be free from a system that cannot save you is to let it go and to cling to the one that can. That's how radical faith in Jesus is. We're not asking you to change your opinion about something when we call you to Christ. We're asking you to give up everything you thought you knew about the world and about yourself and about God, and let Jesus be it. Where do you stand this morning with Jesus? Are you one of these people the author of Hebrews is so concerned about? One of those who likes to hang out in the lobby? You kind of like some of the stuff about Jesus, but this whole thing of going in full, everything, all in, hold nothing back. I belong to Him, and He is my hope, period. You're still not ready for that? I want to encourage you today to let go of the banana and to free yourself of a way of living life that can never accomplish for you what you need accomplished. You need more than just to feel good about yourself every once in a while. You need more than money. You need more than the things this world will applaud you for. You need to be freed from sin. You need to be restored to communion with God. You need to rediscover what the human family was intended to be, where we don't just limit ourselves to the people that are convenient to us and that feed our ego and that give us what we want from them, but we discover a life lived outward. That's the life Jesus calls us into. I want to invite you today to let go of whatever you've been holding on to and cling to the one hope that is a sure thing, Jesus. If that's what God's put on your heart this morning, I want to ask you to have the courage to get up and come forward and tell somebody. Tell somebody that that's the commitment you want to make today, and they will pray with you. That's what we will have people up here whose only purpose is to encourage you, to pray with you, and to rejoice with you at what God is doing in your life. Please come while we sing. Let's all stand. I'd like to ask the musicians to come forward. Steve and Patty and Charlie and Becky, could you help me with the invitation? Please come while we sing.